Welcome everybody to the latest in our Friday morning drop-in sessions. I'm really pleased to welcome Katie McConochie to join us today and tell us I think a bit of a fun and interesting story about Katie's experience in process architecture and process change. I won't do too much of an introduction to steal your thunder, so I'll hand straight over, Katie, and let you go on.
Thanks, Craig. Nice to be here. I'm going to ask you to put something in the chat. So if you want to have your chat window open, that would be good to get started. And I'm going to share my screen. So I'm trying something new today, so I hope it works. You should see on the screen something that says warming up. Is that what you're seeing? Great.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're warmed up, so let's move on. Yeah, so I'm just by way of an introduction, I'm Katie McConochie from Learn Change. I've worked in the world of process and process improvement for at least 25 years, and I've had corporate roles in process excellence at a number of big companies like Vodafone, Inmarsat and Colt, which is not on there, where I met Craig and Chris. So I've worked in process, and one of the reasons I called out Simon's hashtag is that I have always been passionate about process, and I always will be, and I can't stop myself being a process thinking person. But increasingly I got interested in the people side of change and how you get people to understand the value of process, or indeed any business change in a project. And I've worked a lot in supporting big IT transformation programs, which is an area that often the process and the people side get woefully underrated. So in the last year or so, I decided to set up my own training consultancy called Learn Change. So then it's the clues in the name. I love learning. I love other people, helping other people learn, and it's all about the people side of change. So that's what I'm about. Very quick potted history. So when I started my working life, I didn't know what a process was. And thinking back, I think my first piece of process work was in the software company I worked for early in my career, when there was a software company, and it was in sort of boom times in the sort of late 80s, and giving my age away. And this software company was doing really, really well, and they were charging their clients a hefty whack of support and maintenance fees. I don't know whether that still goes on. We used to sort of rinse these clients for all this money. And invariably, if someone had a technical support problem, they'd ring up the company and they'd say, oh, I've got a problem with my accounts package that you sold me. And we'd say, oh, sorry, Tom's out of the office today. He's at another client. He's back in on Thursday. And that was it. Oh, well, okay. So I was a bit embarrassed about that. And I remember saying to the directors, look, we need to put something in place here, because we're taking money and we should have a process. So I think that was probably my first taste of putting some process in place. And I got involved in things like Ticket, which is a way back when process standard, and ISO 9000. So I sort of got into process more because I thought it was the right thing to do. When I worked at Vodafone, I became a Six Sigma black belt. So I was looking at process very much with an improvement lens. And it was all about, getting the voice of the customer, solving problems, really getting to the root cause. And I loved that. I was quite a kind of passionate evangelical person about Six Sigma and the power of using data and evidence to get things changed, and did some really good, interesting projects, especially in customer call centers. But what was interesting back then in Vodafone, I'm sure it's different now, this was some years ago, there wasn't really anywhere to keep the processes that were improved as part of our project. So we'd always start with the SIPOC, we'd always do as-is workshops, as part of our Six Sigma DMAIC methodology, design a new process, do a bit of training, and then that was it. The processes didn't really live anywhere. So, and I always used to wonder why that was. I didn't really understand what should have been there until I moved into sort of next stage of my career, where I got much more involved working with people who understood a thing called process architecture. And that was when I started thinking about how processes really helped in a wider enterprise context. So I've put down in my there a special year of 2011. Would anyone like to guess what was special about the year 2011 for me? Just have a random guess. It's not really a trick question.
Preparation for the Olympics.
Well, I would love to think I was getting ready for the Olympics, but that wasn't it. Any other suggestions?
You got your black belt?
No, I had my black belt. Actually, it was when I met you guys, when I met Chris and Craig. So, I mean, really a special day, a special year. So I've known Craig and Chris for about, well, 10 years. And I have learned so much from them. And I'm sure you wouldn't be on this session if you didn't know what an inspiring pair of guys they are. And Colin, I'm sorry, I haven't met you properly before. I'm sure you are too. And they stimulated some really good thinking for me and made me sort of get into this world of how do you make processes part of the corporate lexicon to help people understand what they're doing or maybe what they're not doing. So we did some great work together. Craig was just reminiscing about working out in Barcelona, and Chris, I think we had less exotic settings, usually meetings in London, but we did some really good work on structure and getting processes in place and some good buy-in in some areas with our processes. So why have I put a brick wall up there? Well, I have over the years felt very frustrated at times that what seems obvious to me about process and why it's of value wasn't really thought the same by so many other people. So the topic that we're doing today, this how to get people to think differently about process, is really what sparked us to have this this session this morning. But so before I tell you what I have was my frustration, would you just spend 1 minute just writing any of your bugbears in the chat, and let's just see what you've experienced, whether we've got any common threads. So just fire away in the chat and let's see what we get. Okay, can everyone see the chat coming up?
Yeah.
Yep, good. Yeah, people think process gets in the way. Time consuming, yeah. Negative, yeah, nice one, Chris. Right, some really great comments here. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Colin. Okay, so some really excellent things. So Craig, I assume we'll save the chat to be able to see these afterwards and kind of consolidate them. But yeah, I think all of the above, I think I would concur, probably seen all of those and heard all of those comments, but I'm going to pick on one that was a particular bugbear of mine, and I'm just going to tell you a quick story. So I suppose one of the ones that has always bugged me is that people think that they can just do their own thing with process. So they get excited and they think, well, it's just about what we want to do. I don't care about anybody else. I don't care how it fits. So in one of the companies I was working with a few years ago, and I would say you did a pretty good job of establishing process as a topic that people were kind of, some people were interested, more interested in than when I wasn't there. So we set up our process excellence framework, and we had a process mapping tool. It wasn't SCORE, unfortunately, but we had a process mapping tool, and we got people quite interested in process being a useful tool in the business. And some of that came because we used Lean Six Sigma as a bit of a hook. We did a little bit of yellow belt training, which got people interested, and we said, well, that's just part of process. So people got interested and we supported some big projects. And there was one part of the business that got really excited and they said, oh, this is great, we're going to do it. And they went off and we offered them training. We did a nice little training package. We had standards, we had templates, governance, and we established a nice central process library. So we were on a governance meeting, and a few months went on, and I used to look at what was going on, and I said to one of my team, I can see that, let's call her Rosie, they're writing tons of process. What are they doing? What are they doing? It all looks pretty ropey to me. It's not to standard. They're naming conventions all over the shop. Can you go and have a chat with them and tell them to kind of buckle down and follow the rules, kind of thing? So off went my process lead person, and he came back and said, well, it was a pretty tricky conversation, and they don't really want to stop what they're doing. They're full on, they're doing this piece of work. So I said, well, okay, let's just, he read them the riot act in a gentle way. Another few months went past, nothing changed, more and more processes appearing in, by their dozens, literally. So I said then to one of my directors, can you go and, this is 2 strikes, 3 strikes, and they're out. And so off went one of my directors and came back, same story, tricky conversation. They don't want to listen to what we've got to say. So I said, well, 3 strikes and we're going to take their license away, because actually I'm not having this. We're not having them doing their own thing, not following the standards, cluttering up our process repository with all sorts of stuff. What are they doing? So in the end, I had a pretty major standoff with this person. It ended up okay. We came to some sort of compromise. So it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was my finest hour. Let's put it that way. So let's wind the clock forward. I'm going to share I don't know if anybody's done, I feel embarrassed to be saying this, but hey, I don't know if anybody else has had some terrible things that they've done, but that was one of mine. So let me just wind the clock forward a little bit, if I can. And so I'm now thinking about my people side of change. I've done quite a lot of work on change management in theory and in practice, and got the war wounds and the t-shirt. And what I have come up with is to distilled out sort of 8 golden rules of change management. So to do a change well, having a great sponsor who's visible and active in whatever is going on, whatever the change is, to expect resistance and plan for it, to make sure you know what the outcomes are of what you're trying to achieve, know why that's important and why it's important now. That's the sort of what's in it for me question. Know who's impacted, and also how the change is going to stick. So whether that's process or a new system or a new policy, how is the change going to stick? What training is needed to make that work? And then last but definitely not least, communicate. So 2-way communication, listening, taking feedback, acting on it. So here I am a few years on with these as my lovely golden rules. And I think back to that story and I thought, well, if I had to go down that list and think about it, what would I take from it with my rear view mirror of perspective? So the visible and active sponsor. And so in the context of process excellence, that was me. And I was completely out of touch with what was going on in that part of the business. And part of the reason for that was that Mary, as I've named her, was I would say quite a difficult person. She probably thought I was a difficult person. And I was avoiding having contact with her because I didn't really feel that we were going to be aligned in our thinking. So I kind of knew in the back of my mind that I wasn't going to be very aligned with her. Expect resistance. Well, expect resistance from number 1, from me, holding up the mirror. I was really rigid. I had my view of the process architecture, the framework, the rules, the governance, and I was not going to bend. Well, again, you wouldn't say a great recipe for success. I didn't know what the business area was going to use the processes for, and I didn't really know what they were trying to achieve. So actually what they really were trying to do, they had a very good reason for doing what they were doing, is that they had a lot of new starters coming on and they wanted to create a sort of training manual for onboarding new starters. Well, that sounds like a pretty good use of process to me, but it didn't fit with the framework and the model that I had in my mind and that I designed. I didn't know, so these are slightly the wrong order. I didn't know why it was important to them. Well, it was important because they wanted to be more efficient. They wanted to get people up to speed more quickly. And Mary, the tricky manager, actually, her instincts were completely right. She wanted to have a reference point, her one version of truth for her team, so that they would know how to perform their role when they joined her team and get up to speed quickly. So here we get into the kind of interesting choppy waters. So my view of adoption was processes need to live in the central corporate library because they're a corporate asset and they're the go-to place for everybody. Their view was, these are our processes, they're for my team only. I want to use them for training. We'll update them, it's fine, no problem. We don't really want them published anywhere, but that's okay. Now, that wasn't really the right answer, but again, my rigidity prevented me from working through with a solution for them. I think that one of the biggest lessons and one of the things I'm putting into practice in my own consultancy is that training's never enough. Just training someone how to use a tool or a system, you've got to follow up with some sort of coaching and support, because if we'd stayed in touch with this community, I'm sure we could have steered it to a situation which was good for everybody. They got what they wanted, we aligned into the architecture, we learned some things, and we got what we needed from a business point of view. And from a communication point of view, I'd certainly not got my message across, and I was not out of touch. So it goes full circle. I was out of touch, I was inflexible, we weren't learning. So the net result of all this was that we did sort something out, but there was a massive amount of number one, rework, so cost to the business, redoing it, realigning everything, which if we'd been in touch, had followed up with coaching, we'd probably have got aligned much better. And the relationships were a bit cracked and fractured. Thank goodness my team managed it better than I did. You know, my instruction they didn't follow, which was a good thing, but it was tricky, and they you know, it was a bit of a stressful situation. I was a bit fed up with them because I wasn't getting what I wanted. So keeping those communication channels open, understanding why people want to do something is number one. So with my benefit of hindsight and perhaps a bit of age and wisdom, I would say there were three real key lessons for me in terms of the benefit of hindsight. One is stay in touch with the business stakeholders you're working with, because people will have their views, they'll be going off down tangents, doing their own thing, being resistant. And if, like me, you kind of ignored that, then the costs are significant. Be flexible. I'm still work in progress for me. I'm quite a process. I think it's a problem for people who are process orientated. We like things to be structured and follow rules. It's part of, I think it's a bit of part of the DNA, but we have to flex. And certainly looking back on that, I wish I'd been a bit more flexible, and keep checking, understanding the communication, what are you trying to do? Why is it important to you? There's always a solution. And I think one of the things that I've learned, I remember Chris in particular, it was a different project and a different thing. There was a way we wanted to do something, I think, around the lovely subject of having product variants in a process, so different ways of ordering processes, ordering products, and having a process map. And I remember Chris saying to me, "You're right, Katie, we should do it like that, but the business isn't ready. So just have two versions of the process. And eventually, because you'll have visual representation, someone as well as you will say, oh, that's a bit dumb, because 90% of that's the same." I remember Chris saying that to me, and it was great counsel. I needed to apply that more in this situation. So I think SCORE do all of these things well. We wouldn't be in this call if SCORE guys weren't staying in touch with you, helping support you. And I love seeing all the questions that come out, being flexible, understanding what's really happening. And for me, if I go back to here I am, my brick wall, I'm still learning. And that's why I've set up my business, and why I love these kind of sessions, because that's how we all learn and pick up tips and frustrations, and being a bit open to knowing that we've got it wrong from time to time. So that was really my very quick story of rearview mirror from a particular perspective. And I'm happy to have questions and take it from there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing the story, Katie. A fascinating story. Before we take any questions, can I just give you another opportunity to plug what
Yes.
you do with Learn Change today?
Of course, yeah. So I have set up, as I say, a training consultancy, and what I offer is it's really three flavors of training. One is around change management, so the people side of change in the context of projects. So for me, I've seen in IT projects in particular, the change management effort is often pitifully last minute, and not enough. So my 8 golden rules, I'm always plugging people in project land to say, make sure you think about these, make sure you have a work stream around the people side of change. And I'm speaking at a couple of the project management conferences on that topic to try and educate project managers a bit more on that side of change. And then the other thing that I've done a lot of in recent years is company culture and culture change. So the behaviors that go with adapting and adopting change, and they're all the same things. People are scared of change. How do you get the right behaviors? How do you get collaboration across boundaries? So they're my processes, my world. How do you break that as a corporate culture level to say, well, the bigger picture is they're the customers of everybody. How do we get people to work to maximize the benefit of that? And some other things around how you show up at work and being positive and taking accountability. So I think someone put something about process ownership in the chat. So having process owners who are accountable for the performance of their process, there's a cultural behavior element to that. And then I do also offer sort of basic continuous improvement, simple tools, training as well. So that's really what I'm doing. And I know Kirsty, who's on the call, has been looking around my website for my tip of the month. I send out a tip of the month. I'll be doing the next one in June. So if anybody wants to subscribe to that, I will add you to my list. And I'm on LinkedIn. So happy to have a chat about anything I've talked about today.